The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those here in the chat room and those listening from around the world, we appreciate each and every one of you. Got a great show lined up tonight, as always. And I'm glad that everybody is here, those listening here and around the world. So, because we have so much, tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Just sitting here waiting for that space debris to fall on me.
Space debris? Don't be saying things like that. And we have with us Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
And we have Tabby Cat Gash.
Hey, everybody.
And because, Tabby, you had this guest on your show tonight, and yes, I got a feeling there's going to be a whole lot of talking and questions and stuff, so why don't we go ahead and get started? And Jeff, why don't you introduce the guest?
Our guest tonight is, I lost the thing there. Tonight's guest is Morgan Knudsen. She's an award-winning founder of Entity Paranormal Research and Teachings, as well as the world-renowned Teaching the Living program for clients. Morgan brings classes and presentations on this phenomenon to a new level, with inspiring lectures and include fire art demonstrations, wind-blowing evidence, and uplifting stories. Morgan makes audiences recognize that managing who they are on the inside directly impacts what they experience on the outside, and to re-examine the world they thought they knew. And currently she can be seen on various television networks internationally, such as Discovery and Channel, which are pretty much becoming all paranormal all the time, Destination America, T&E, UK's Quest Red, and is the resident paranormal specialist featured on Haunted Hospitals and Paranormal 911. And she can also be found on her daily live stream show on Facebook, Spiritual Healthcare, which I cannot find, although it apparently exists. Her book, Teaching the Living, From Heartbreak to Happiness in a Haunted Home, is out now. So welcome, Morgan Knudsen.
Thank you, guys. This is awesome. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I went to Facebook to try and find a link to your Spiritual Healthcare. Is that just on your Entityseeker page?
Yeah, it's on the Entityseeker page. It's also on the YouTube channel and the our website as well, entityseeker.ca. All the classes are there.
Okay, guys.
146 of them now.
Now, you do all kinds of different things. The Entityseeker, a firebender, you work with snakes. What does firebender...
He's not an avatar.
Yeah, what does firebender and snakes have to do with the paranormal?
You know, it's funny that there is such a crossover, and I think my firework didn't originally start out as part of Entityseeker. It was something that I picked up because I've got a lot of friends in production and circus and all that kind of thing. So it was something I started as a kind of a meditation practice. It was something that I wanted to master. It was kind of a goal that I had. So I started to work with that. I had some really great teachers from all over the world. And the more I worked with it, the more I realized that there was such a crossover between the knowledge and the self-awareness that I had to have in working with a substance that really had a mind of its own. It can be dangerous, it can be amazing and wonderful and cleansing, but I realized that mastery of self, that mind over matter, the discipline that was going into what I was doing with the fire arts really was coming from a lot of my foundation with Entityseeker and how I look at non-physical energy, going into these different cases, and picking curiosity over fear and practicing that. And then I realized, you know what, this is a teaching tool. And it's a very visual teaching tool for a lot of people. So I started to incorporate these lessons on changing your paradigm about the paranormal and what we understand of it, with using fire demonstraration. So that's how that kind of ended up blending together. And it's been something now that I've kind of become known for. And I ended up doing a number of these sort of short classes on my YouTube channel, so people could get an idea as to what these lessons were about. But the snake aspect of it, I have a python at home, and he's just become a bit of a celebrity because everybody, I'll post photos of him and stuff, and people know him. But I think the connecting factor with all of that is the fact that here are these things that are misjudged. There's a lot of preconceived notions about it, in the same way that there's a lot of preconceived notions about the paranormal. And I like to break down those paradigms and break down those stigmas.
Yeah, I really think that it's probably one of the coolest things that you do use, not only your, I can't really call him a pet, because Galen is definitely a part of your family, just like my own cats are a part of my family. And the others have what we refer to as fur babies. But using your fire abilities, the way you are able to manipulate the fire and everything, I think that's probably one of the most fascinating things that you do, because that is not only a very dangerous thing, so it takes a lot of discipline and a lot of concentration, and that can be adapted to all facets of life. And
absolutely.
I wonder how you incorporate that into the teachings, your classes and so forth.
Well, yeah, it's such a great question, because I think part of this is the fact that it is about science. A lot of this is very much about science. So everything that I'm doing, even with the fire, is very science based. Like, once you understand things like thermal lag and the different consistencies of fuels and flashpoints, and what's going to burn longer than other things, and what is more explosive than other things, and whatever, you get into the science of it, and it becomes very explainable. And to look at it, it looks like a magic trick. Immediately people often say, oh, you've got to have something on your hands, you're holding fire in your hands, you're doing all this stuff, there must be some trick to it. And there really is no trick. It really is all about understanding the science behind how fire and fuel works, how it interacts, when to do certain tricks and when not to do certain tricks. And the paranormal is very much the same, where it really is when you begin to understand what's going on behind the scenes, the stuff becomes very manageable. And my biggest thing with people when I'm first starting to get up and do a show, and talk to people about this, is that I ask everybody, how many of you guys have had the lecture from their parents about how fire is hot, you never touch fire, and of course everyone puts their hand up. And so I say, okay, you know what? What if I told you that, of course, there is truth to that paradigm, because we all know the destruction that fire can cause. But what if I told you there was a gray area, there's a loophole in that, and that your paradigm might be wrong? And of course, everybody kind of laughs, because they think, well, that's silly. That's something we've grown up on. We know that. And so I start to demonstrate this stuff to them, and immediately, like, they sort of run through this gambit of, okay, well, this is a trick, or this is, it's an illusion, or it's this, that, or the other thing. And when they finally come to the conclusion that it isn't, I always just tell them, I'm like, look, if I can break down this paradigm, then you have to be able to start to question the other paradigms that you've got about whether this stuff can happen, or whether it exists, or whether you have to question it. Because if you don't, then you're stuck in this rut, and you're not gonna be able to get through to that. So there's a number of lessons that I try to teach, but I think that's probably one of the most primary.
And what I really love about it is that I was reading through the chapters here, and you can pretty much apply it to anything in your life where there's any sort of conflict, or the need to let go of whatever crisis there seems to be there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it really is a handbook for the living as well as a handbook for the dead.
Yeah, it all applies. And when you realize that if you've got toxicity going on in one area, it's bleeding from somewhere. And when you realize that it's not just something that is occurring in this isolated little spot in your life, that there's other stuff that's going on within you that is creating these various realities that you've got going on. It's really the most empowering thing. And it applies to everything. And I think people have this idea that the paranormal is happening outside of themselves. And they don't realize that this is not something that's afflicted on us. This is something that we have a role in the same way that we have a role in our jobs or, our family's life or anything else. We do play a role, and the energy that we bring to the table is going to play a role in what we're getting.
Yeah. I think it also, to me, working with something like fire, as you said, being taught that we should kind of fear it, don't touch it, it's going to burn you, that type of thing. It also, if you are able to, I wouldn't exactly say harness it, but that's pretty much what you do. You have to realize that there is a certain amount of danger involved in it, but you have to respect that. And a lot of people don't really fully understand that, yes, you can get along with something like fire, but you have to respect what it does. And if you don't, that's when it can get away from you, right?
Absolutely. And when you're out of touch, it's funny actually that you bring that up, because one of the ways that I know that I'm not centered, or my mind's wandering or something like that, is I'll be doing some sort of fire practice or some sort of drill or something like that, and if the fire is going to nip me, it's when I'm feeling disconnected. Every time, like every single time, if I'm going to get nipped, that's when it's going to happen. And it's going to be like the fire, does a jump and, nips my hand or something like that. And it's always a reminder. It's always an indicator. Hold on. Now's your time to stop, recenter, start again. And the paranormals are very similar to that, and we get these little nudges. And I always say negative entities are kind of like that, where they're such a brilliant reflection of what you've got going on inside. And if you've got something that's going on in the house that's not so good, the great thing about them is that they really are emotional indicators, in the same way that fire can be an emotional indicator, where you've got something that's going on that's, not so fun or not so friendly. And the more disconnected you get, the worse it's going to get. So they really are just a symbol of saying, hey, you got to recenter. You've got something going on in your energy that's not so good. And fire does the same thing, where it'll reflect to you where your balance is every single time.
Yeah. So the whole thing is about focus, pretty much, just focusing on what's going on and not being distracted.
Yeah. And disciplining your mind enough to care enough to feel good. I think that's part of the problem, where people kind of allow themselves to get into a downward spiral with stuff. And the more downward spiral you hit, the worse things go. It's like when you get out of bed in the morning and you stub your toe, and then, you watch your day kind of spiral from that point on. And it's kind of the same thing where, in a, I guess, more extreme sense, but if you start out and you let your brain kind of spiral in on that event for a long time, the universe has this great way of bringing you more events that make you feel the same way. And it's a problem. So I think we have to be disciplined enough to care that we feel good. Like, what am I thinking right now? Is this serving me? Is this kind? Is this even kind to myself, to be thinking this stuff? And, it makes you recenter. And when you care about how you feel, then everything else around you starts to shift.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a question from the chat room. It's from Sherry. And she wants to know, do you work with fire elementals?
Well, that's kind of a cool question. No. I mean, I guess it depends on how you define it, or how you define it. Like, I mean, the idea of fire and whatnot having a spirit to it. I mean, I think there's definitely something to that, because, I mean, fire does really have a mind of its own. My partner, he always says, you dance with it. He was like, that's a dance partner, and he couldn't be more right. Like, even if I'm doing fire choreography or something like that, because we do music and stuff like that together, you can only choreograph it so much, because the fire really is it's got its own moves, and it's gonna do what it wants to do, and you gotta flow with it. So there is that element to it, but yeah, I guess it would depend on how you're defining elemental.
Yeah. When it comes to using the various different disciplines that you have, I've noticed that you not only focus on the positive in life, but you also look to how you can turn the negatives around. And as you said, sometimes if you are distracted when you're using the fire, it will come back and nip at you. And I'm wondering, when something like that happens, not only do you go, ouch, I need to pay a little more attention, but is that a way to actually look at the way our life is, where if something comes back and bites you, it just makes you a little more aware of your surroundings?
Well, exactly. And, and that's really what it's for. And I think sometimes we talk to ourselves in a way where, we think, oh, we've got to fight back at this, or we have to, like, we become very antagonistic towards our environment. And sometimes the stuff that goes on in our lives, it's a warning bell. It's a warning bell saying, hold on, something's off, something's not right, whether it be, you're not centered, or this, this event is off, or, something going on. But yeah, I mean, we don't really pay enough attention to that, because I think we've got very strict and strong paradigms, especially in the West, about, how we're supposed to be, we've got to go upstream with everything instead of just allowing things to flow and float downstream. And oftentimes the more we fight into something, when we ignore those little warning signs, we sort of ignore those little nips, then that ends up to be what happens is stuff will get worse and worse and worse. And usually when you go into a project or an event or a relationship or anything like that, and if the energy that it is incepted with is usually the energy that will run through it to the end. And that's just something I found in general through most of my life. I've been at this and in TV and doing paranormal research and stuff for 20 years. And I've found that to be a consistent thing. If the energy that's going in is rough, unless there is a massive drastic action to shift that momentum, then you're going to watch that play out to the end.
Yeah. I guess that it sounds a little harsh in many ways to a lot of people, because it sounds almost like, well, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Once you start thinking negative, it's just going to keep coming back at you and at you and at you unless you change, your thoughts and your process. And then there's other people that say, no, you've got to change that thought process. And how do you tell people that don't have that mindset that they can change that negativity in their life? How do you go about, convincing them that there is a way to change that?
Well, I think, first of all, you can't really convince them. It really is a decision that they've got to get sick and tired of being sick and tired. Some people, especially, even clients that have come to me over the years, and whatever, some people are just not ready to let go of being the victim, of being miserable. Like they're getting something from it, because you don't do what doesn't work for you. And I think you have to be ready. You have to be sick and tired of being miserable. And once you're sick and tired enough, then you hit this point where you're like, you know what, I'm open to doing something new. I have to do something different because my life this is not working. And, but they've got to be ready for it. And they have to be, open and willing to be able to see the small things, the small blessings that they've got in their world. And sometimes that's as simple as, hey, I woke up this morning and I can breathe. Maybe you start there. But, unless you're willing to do that, unless you've hit that point of change, there is no amount of convincing that you're going to be able to do with someone. I had a friend actually for quite a long time, and we were quite good friends for probably about 7 years. And, she ended up hitting that exact rut. And no matter what solution that I put in front of her, it didn't matter what it was, whether it be new job, new this, new that, changing this thought process, going to get this help or that help, nothing was enough. And she had an answer for everything. And it just gets to the point where, people will fight for their limitations. And if you've got somebody like that, then you've got to let them go and trust that if it's their time and they want to do that, they'll either come back, or they're going to find it from somebody who they can hear it from. But it might not be you.
Yeah.
You make it sound almost like a paranormal addiction in a lot of ways. And the same processes are invoked when you do have to get somebody out of that addiction. Correct?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because a lot of people, and not everybody, because there's some people, of course, that they run into the negative stuff, and it is, they want out. They do the work, and I mean, there's been so many people that I've worked with that have been unbelievable examples of that. But negativity and victimhood is an addiction for a lot of people, and it's as dangerous as drugs or alcohol or anything else that people are using to cover up whatever's bleeding. And when we've got somebody who is addicted to whatever it is that's going on, whether it be being the victim or the drama that's going on, the attention that they're getting from it, anything like that, straight up across the board, they're not ready for that for my program. They won't receive it because they're just not ready. But yeah, it's the people who are addicted to being. To that attention, to whatever they've got going on, it's usually they're entrenched in it pretty hard.
Yeah. I think there's one sentence that you had in your book that really sums it up. It says, "The fear of the next occurrence and constant thought about it attracts the next incident. Usually this results in an endless pattern of anticipatory anxiety that becomes difficult to break." And that's pretty much, I think, what a lot of people do. If they get into this rut, and I'm one of them, where it seems like it's a snowball effect, where something happens and it seems like, oh my God, this is going on, and then this heaps on top, and oh my God, what's next? The next thing you know, something else is happening, and you can't help but think, when does it stop? When does this end? And you begin to think, is this going to be my normal? Is this how it's always going to be?
Yeah, and that anticipatory anxiety, I think so many people have fallen into this over the years. I mean, of course, I've done it. I think everybody's been there. And it is such a vicious cycle, because it really comes back to, how much do you want to, put a stop to this? How can you start to refocus what's going on? Because the cycle that clients that I see clients get into so often, and people in their daily life as well, is that one thing will happen, and it's almost like if you've got a penny and you hold that penny up to your eye, the penny looks huge. But when you take that penny away and you drop it on the ground, it's a really small object. There's tons of other objects around it. And it's quite small, it's quite minuscule, and you can pick it up and handle it and whatever, and it's no big deal. But when it's right up in front of you, it looks massive. And I think, when people experience one of these things, it so stands out to them in their world that they tend to goose up the energy of it and not realize it. They call their friends, they're writing it down, they go to work and they're thinking about it at work, and they're worried about getting home, and the incident itself is over. It'd been over maybe for a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, and they're still on it, still reliving it, still in that emotional momentum of that occurrence. And when we start to focus in any way, our energy in any way, towards something for an X amount of time, the universe has got a great way of making that stuff show up again. And needless to say, it does. So now you've got the next incident, and that person's going, see, I told you this was going to happen, and then they're more convicted in the idea that this is going to happen again, and it does. And it's a rut you have to be able to break, because until it's broken, you're going to be stuck in it.
Yeah. I know one person in particular, they always refer to themselves as a S blank blank T magnet. And because it seems like every time you turn around, something is happening to them. And it isn't positive. It seems like anything and everything is always happening to this person. And it's really sad, because after a while, some people get to the point where they think, well, this is definitely my normal life. There's not a darn thing I can do about it. It's always happening. So is there something that within your teachings and your seminars, what do you suggest to people that constantly feel, well, I am a crap magnet and there's nothing I can do about it? How do they get out of that? How do they get out of that mindset?
First thing they have to do is give up the story. They have to give up the story, because the people that are in that rut have a very definite way of telling their story. And it's funny, because when I'm interviewing clients or we're doing haunted hospitals, or hearing stories from people that are submitting stories and whatever, you know the type of activity that's going to be happening based on how they tell their story. And it's really fascinating, because you can usually tell exactly what's going to be going on, or guess for the most part what's going to be going on in somebody's life experience based on how they're framing it. And I guarantee if you ask that same person, tell me about your childhood, they will list you every possible negative thing about their childhood and probably not one accomplishment. And so the first thing is they have to start telling their story different. So what I often will get people to do as an exercise is say, pull out your journal, tell me your story, write down your story, beginning to end, write it out, few pages, and read it back to yourself. Because when you read it back to yourself, or you have somebody read it back to you, you can start to get a perspective on how you have framed up your experience. And then what I would encourage people to do is start to list the things that have gone on that you're proud of, things that you've been passionate about, things that have been positive in your experience, and start to reframe what you've got going. Because until that paradigm shifts, until you make that decision, you are going to continue to frame the world in such a way that you are going to get that example and that proof given back to you over and over and over again. So that's the core of it, really.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a student of film noir, and this pretty much falls into the line of that, where one bad decision puts you in a frame of mind, so you make the next bad decision, you make the next bad decision. So it really does steamroller in a lot of ways.
Oh, definitely. And once people are in that rut, I think who you have around you as well is something to really start to examine. If you've got people around you that will sit in your misery with you, that's a problem. If you've got people around you that, or even aren't supportive, maybe just aren't doing what they need to do and stepping up and being who they need to be, that's a problem. So you've really got to take a hard look at the people around you as well. If you've got friends who are, there for you in your misery, but not there for you in your joy, your tendency is probably going to sit in your misery longer. Or if I always say, if you've got 9 friends who are a smoker, you're going to be the 10th. It's kind of the same thing. If you've got a circle that's around you who is motivated, who is, ready to get in gear, that are following their dreams, that are, hungry for that next thing, your behavior is going to change pretty quick, because they're not going to put up with a whole lot else. So if you're being the negative Nelly in the middle of a situation where you've got people that are goal-oriented and dream-oriented and, know where they're going, or at least want to get where they're going, you're going to get dropped like a hot potato. So even that aspect of it, who's around you, pay attention.
Yeah, so it seems that would apply in the paranormal too. If you surround yourself with people who are of the negative, this is a bad haunting. It's demonic. It's evil. It's going to cause you harm. You take on that mindset too. And I know that a lot of times our perception is what dictates the actions or our perceived actions of a haunting. So you're pretty much feeding into that negative role, as it were, yourself.
Yeah, and family can be some of the biggest problem, because families, especially families that have been steeped in this for a very, very long time, oftentimes you'll hear people saying, oh, we're generationally cursed with negative paranormal stuff happening all the time. Well, no, you're not. The problem becomes is that families tend to be pathological, and we pass down our way of thinking to people over and over and over again. We don't usually pass down a habit. We pass down our way of thinking. And that could be a big problem if you've got a family history of this stuff. My family history personally, especially on my dad's side of the family, every single one of them, for the most part, have had a terrible experience with this stuff. My grandmother passed it down to her sons. One of my uncles, he's had a lifetime of hell with this stuff. My grandfather was the same way. It went on and on and on. But when you look at the pathology of how they're interacting, how they're thinking, it makes complete sense. But they'll tell you straight up, "Oh, this stuff's terrible." Well, no, it's not. It's just it's the way you're thinking about it. And it sounds so simple. People think, "Oh, this is too easy. Like, I'm just supposed to get happier." And it's like, well, yeah, but it really does mean everything, because you're getting a reflection back of what you're doing, how you're thinking, and how you're being in the world, and how you're bringing your presence into the world all the time, whether it be through people interactions, animal interactions, experiences, events, paranormal stuff. And when we start to pay attention to that, and especially if you've got something that's generational or something, it'll tell you where you're sitting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think back to the case of the original Exorcist story.
Yep.
And when you are introduced and how you're introduced to the paranormal, let's say, and you have a family upbringing where this sort of thing is demonic, and that is what your mindset is, and you're not old enough to yet rationalize or even figure out for yourself what your belief system is, you're going to take on that role of not so much the subject matter itself, but how you're introduced to it. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, definitely. And that's such a great example too, because Ronald Doe, the little boy in the original case, the real case, his family was very strict about it. I mean, they were religious. They were very strict about the fact that anything that is remotely non-physical is demonic and evil. And he had one aunt by the name of Aunt Tilly, and she was very spiritual. Saw this stuff in a more positive way, and was trying to introduce him to this other side of it. But the family was very much against it. They saw Aunt Tilly as kind of the black sheep. And, of course, we all know what happened after that. Everything kind of went south. But, here you've got a story of, this little boy who, is not only getting these really mixed messages from the family, but then Aunt Tilly passes away, who was his source of that positivity. So his world got pretty dark pretty quick. And, once she passed away and there was sort of no other way of exploring this stuff, and you're getting bombarded with this negativity. I mean, it was really the perfect storm for something to happen.
Yeah. I think the one saying that I really agree with is that perception is reality. If you perceive something as being the truth, then to you that's the reality. And
yeah.
So if a person well and truly believes that something that they're doing is wrong, then it's probably wrong in their eyes. And when it comes to the paranormal, if you go into a location and you are, excuse me, hairball, if you go in there and you are, have this mindset that you're going to go in there and you're going to excuse me, you're going to encounter something nasty or something evil, then that's the way you're going to perceive it. And it's a shame that people do that.
Yeah, and there's events don't have a good or a bad. People are the ones that assign events a good or bad label. Events just, they are what they are. So we really get to pick which label that we're gonna frame it, and and to be able to say, okay, how long are we going to focus on the problem of what's going on, and how much energy are we going to put into the solution of what's going on? And I think a lot of people they really get stuck in the problem, and what happens is the energy and the vibration of the problem is not the energy of the solution and the answer. So if you're dwelling on the problem and you're focused there, you are nowhere near the vibrational energy of where the solution is. So you have to be able to shift into that.
So McLuhan was correct. The medium is the massage.
I mean, there you go. Yeah.
Not the message, but the massage.
No, it's the massage. It's interesting how, and the message is also that the messenger is also part of all of this. So it really is how we're introduced at a certain age or at any time in our life, really, when we're starting to grow. How one is introduced to a subject matter really does make a great deal of difference.
Yeah, I think how we introduce, especially with kids, kids, it's so cool with them, because when they're really, really young and something happens, like if something tragic happens, like a parent passes away or something like that, they're usually the ones that recover first. It's the adults who really, really, really struggle. It's the kids who are usually coming forward and saying, "Oh no, I saw Grandma the other night, and we talk and she visits and whatever." And the adults are grieving, and they're a huge mess over the fact this person has died. But it's the kids who typically make that connection back faster. And usually because they don't have, at a super early age, or at least most of them don't have, a preconceived notion that relationship is going to go away. So they end up having that connection back. There's less resistance in their energy and their emotions. So, whoever that is, that person that's now, pure positive energy, is able to come back and have that conversation with them, and build that connection again. Where with adults, we get stuck in our muck in our heads, and because we're so good at that, and the kids are usually the ones that roll forward and they do okay, but we've got to be really careful about what messages we're sending them. If we're sending them the message that no, you're never going to see that person again, or that whatever, that's not helpful. We have a lot to learn from the level of connectedness that kids still have with who they really are, their source energy.
So when you're teaching adults to get out of that paradigm that they've put themselves into. Do you teach them to go back to that childlike openness of new possibilities? Is it possible for these adults to go back to more of an open-mindedness in some situations for a different subject matter?
Yeah, I don't think it's a matter of going back, because I think going back usually has too much resistance for people. They immediately sort of get hung up on all their crap, but they can start from where they are. And the best thing to always do is just gauge where you are, and start there. I think one of the mistakes of a lot of therapists and stuff like that is they want you to root through all your crap that you've probably forgotten about, and you're sitting there back in your muck trying to sort it all out and trying to remember what happened, and you don't really remember. And there's also so it becomes sort of a giant mess sometimes. But we can always look at where we are, start from where we are, and begin there, because when we can start understanding what we're dealing with, what's going on right now, that we can start to clean up, that's usually where the healing starts. And once stuff starts to be cleaned up, and that's going to be different for every single person, that connection will start to come back. And, the more we can just quiet our minds a bit, quiet our hearts a bit, and just start with the possibility. You have the possibility of just opening that door a crack. And if you can get that door open a crack, stuff will start to show up in your experience over and over again, where you start to realize, hey, wait a minute, there's something's moving here. But it really is a matter of starting where you are and being willing enough and being vulnerable enough, because people have such a hard time with vulnerability, being willing to be vulnerable enough to not only to be wrong about your perception and your story, but to be able to sit there and go, okay, you know what, can I clean something up that's going to let this light in a little bit? And then lo and behold, little bit by little bit, you can start to see improvement.
Yeah, I keep thinking, I really sincerely hope that the whole question of tell me about your childhood disappears very quickly.
Yeah.
You're right. It doesn't help dredging the past back, because you're not going that way anymore.
Yeah, there's a reason why our rear view mirror in our car is smaller than the windshield. There really is, because if we spent our whole time looking in the damn rear view mirror, we'd be screwed. We'd be getting into accidents left, right, and center, and that's what happens. People get stuck looking at their past over and over and over again, and really the things that you want to look for, because there's plenty of people that have stuff that is going on that happened in the past that are still affecting them. And this is probably one of the biggest questions that I get is like, how do you know? And you have to start paying attention to what you've got going on in your space, in your state of mind right now. What's happening in your environment right now? And when you can kind of back engineer that a little bit, you can start to see where the problems are. But if you haven't thought about it for 30 years, then the odds are, it's not an issue. There's no point in dredging that back up. But that's one of the great things about these negative entities, as crappy as they can be, is that they tend to be such a great reflection of what the problem is. So, for example, I've had a couple of cases where it was a young moms who get out of domestic violence situations, and they move on, and they get remarried. They're doing their thing. They have their kid. Everything seems to be okay in terms of their immediate environment, except they've done nothing to clean up the abuse that they went through. They might have residual PTSD. There might be something going on, but they didn't do the work to heal it. They worked to heal the environment, but they didn't work to heal the internal stuff. And then next thing you know, you've got this entity that is, this biting and scratching and being violent and whatever. And, now you've basically got a new non-physical boyfriend, like, not that it's human, but some sort of entity, that's mirroring back to you what's going on. And so in some ways, as I say, they can be a real gift, because when you realize that they're reflecting back what's happening with you, you can clean that up. But as soon as you're pointing fingers and blaming, you've missed the point.
So you're talking about starving out something that you've been feeding for decades.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Wow. Well, yeah, and then they start getting really angry because they're hungry. So it's really interesting that you have to then focus, and it sounds like what you're teaching is starve out that little beast and start feeding something a little bit more appropriate.
Exactly, and it's the change in focus that really is going to make the difference. And part of the program that I've taught clients over the years is how to deal with the immediate events that are going on, because by the time you've got something like a negative entity in the house, it's got its own way of being. Like it's manifested. This thing has consciousness. It's active in the space, and the damn thing is, at that point, you've kind of taught it how to treat you. And so you've now got something that is used to dealing with you in a certain dynamic. And if you try to change that dynamic, it's going to get worse before it gets better every time, which is something I always tell clients, because I said, you've allowed this thing to behave the way it's behaved for this amount of time, and you're going to change the rules. And it's not going to be pretty, but you've got to do it. So part of it is the short-term plan is, okay, how do you deal with these immediate incidents? But what is the long-term plan? What are we going to do to get you from point A to point Z, where this thing is no longer in your experience? And the more people shift their focus, shift their energy, shift their get into their passions, whatever, they fall off the radar of these things. And you start to notice the activity is less and less and less and less, and then it's just gone.
Oh.
So, do you have good spirits, somebody who's passed that comes and just wants to talk with someone, let them know that they're there?
They're the best. They're the absolute best. And that's the type of activity that you want. We're hardwired to have that connection. We're supposed to have that connection, which is what always kills me with families when they turn around and say, all this stuff is evil. It's not. This stuff is supposed to be joy and pure positive energy and love and a knowing that there is more, and I think to cut people off from that understanding is terrible. It's a terrible thing to do, because we are really hardwired to be in touch with the non-physical part of who we are, which I think is the broader part of who we are. I think this, the bodies that we have walking around is a very small portion of the larger part of us. And when we can understand that there is that relationship that will continue, it's massive, and that's where the fun stuff really happens. So the people that are on the other side of this, the people that are following their dreams, following their passion, finding positivity in the little things, or just bipping along in life and doing pretty good, dealing with the stresses, but they're on the whole they're pretty positive people. These are the individuals that we're seeing over and over and over again experience this awesome stuff, which is one of the reasons why people in grief have such a hard time accepting the fact that they're not getting visitations right away. Because if you're sitting there in grief, it's the wrong emotion, it's the wrong vibration. So the people, once you start to clear that up and you let go, or you let your mind wander, this is when the majority of these encounters will happen. And when they're positive, it's incredible. I mean, I've had instances with my business partner Stephanie when she passed away a number of years ago. My dad passed away a number of years ago. My little snake sees him frequently around the house. It's really cool, and that connection, we're supposed to have that. Now,
I know it was in 71, 72, something like that. I had a little girl, and we had the name picked out for her and all, and she passed within, I don't think she lived 24 hours. Her lungs wasn't fully developed.
Wow.
So we ended up giving her a different name other than what we had picked. Now, years later, after my son got married, they had a son, And I guess he was about 3. He was able to talk. And I guess he was in his room in the bed, and they had a baby monitor, and he was outside, and he heard him talking with somebody. And he went in, and he asked him, who you talking to? And he said, Tessa. And he said, who? He said, Tessa. He said, who's that? He says, Dad, it's your sister. Well,
oh man,
he didn't know this. He never knew the name that we had picked out for her, and it was Tesla.
That's amazing, and such a perfect example. Here you've got this little boy who is completely in touch with who he is. None of that stigma. Just pure positive energy, and who ends up getting the message. It's so interesting because people typically who are in grief are so often they get so upset because they'll say, for example, somebody will lose their father or something like that, and then you hear of, your second cousin having a visitation with the father, and then the person who's, the one that is experiencing the grief doesn't get any messages. And what I've learned about that is it really is because that other person doesn't have the same level of resistance that the person who is closer to that individual is going through and is working through. So you get a lot of people who are just, they get quite angry because they're going, why wasn't it me? Why wasn't it me? Well, it was the person that, is going to be able to hear the message. And when my business partner, Stephanie, when she passed away, it was a number of years later that I remember I was in my room and I was talking with her, and I had left a question. I'd asked her a question, and I'd gone to sleep that night, and I woke up the next day with a text message from a lady who she worked with at her architecture firm, who I had not seen in probably 5 years, had not spoken to her, nothing. And she said, I have to call you. And I said, okay. So I get on the phone with her. I told her nothing about my conversation with Steph the night before. And she said, you're never going to believe this. But she said, my iPod has been sitting on my dresser. And she said, this thing started going absolutely insane last night. And she said, I couldn't turn it off. When I did turn it off, it turned itself back on. And it turned itself back on to a song that I never listened to. She said, I didn't even know it was on the damn iPod. But she said, my immediate instinct was, she said, I knew this was for you. And I was kind of blown away. And I said, okay, what was the song? And when she told me what the song was the answer to the question that I answered Steph the night before. And I was in too much resistance to receive it. But Darlene wasn't. She picked it up, no problem. So they find that path of least resistance. They'll get the message to you, but they'll find the path of least resistance. And so I totally understand your story.
Well, that was the only time that it happened, and he's 19 now, and he has no memory of it. I guess being that young. If it only happens once or twice over a period of time, it just kind of like you don't even think about it or remember it. But he was real young too, so.
Well, and it wasn't something that was probably meant for him. It was probably something that was meant for you. So I mean, so for him, there's less resistance, less chance of remembering it. It was probably when kids are that age, the events are a lot less significant to them because it's just something that's kind of normal. It's not a oh my God, that was a paranormal occurrence. It was like no, I was talking to my friend. So I don't think kids internalize it the same way that adults seem to internalize it.
Yeah, that's pretty deep. I agree that children have a clean slate when it comes to getting messages. They have a clean slate and no preconceived ideas or notions when it comes to the paranormal. So when you have a child that's able to, pick up on something, get a message, you really should listen to them because they're not going to, BS you. the way an adult probably would. And so I think something like that is probably one of the most profound things you can get, is when a child comes through with a message. That is really profound. That's really deep.
It's huge. And some of the best evidence for the paranormal and for afterlife and all of that kind of thing often comes from kids. The famous Dr. Ian Stevenson, who did decades of research into things like reincarnation. I mean, he probably pulled some of the best evidence for consciousness after death than anybody else in the world. So a lot of it comes from kids. And I think paying attention to that stuff, it's huge. There are certain demographics, kids being one of them, where they've just got there's a very small chance that they're full of it, and we have to pay attention to it.
Exactly. I mean, I know personally when I was a child, not really understanding my own gift for being able to see spirits and so forth, it's kind of difficult to get adults to pay attention to something that you say. So when a child comes up with something like that, and it's just out of the blue, you have to stand there and shake your head and say, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah, and it's easier for adults to think that kids are making it up. It's easier for people to get their head around if they can turn around and say, oh, no, that's just my kid, doing whatever. We have a really bad habit of dismissing kids when they come to us with something, because we've been taught that our imaginations aren't real. And that's, I think, a fundamental problem. Imagination is a tool. If we don't have an imagination, we can't come up with solutions to problems. We can't come up with new ideas. We can't come up with nothing. We can't redirect our thoughts without imagination. So we've got that aspect where immediately we think, oh, it's the kid's imagination. Well, hold on a minute. What does that mean? We dismiss, and it's not a good thing.
Yeah, it's like that show, Kids Say the Darndest Things. And they do. They really do.
I should start a show called Kids See the Deadest Things.
There you go. There's the next hit.
I actually, I in my circle of friends, had a daughter who's got to be in her 20s now. But when she was a toddler, she had there was a ghost that was in her room. That at first some people were saying, "Oh, it's an imaginary friend," but my friends and I are like, "Yeah, we don't know, because my friends are all rather Wiccan and such, so there were all sorts of protections and such, and so they knew it was something benign, but they'd listen, and the girl would be having full-on conversations with an invisible entity.
Yeah, it happens all the time, and and kids can run into the same issues in terms emotional issues and stuff like that. So I mean, it's definitely something you want to plug into as a parent. To find out exactly what's going on. It's never a good idea to just kind of leave that as it is, because there's, enough cases out there where kids end up with, a not so good imaginary friend that turns out to be, real. But again, it's a really good indicator. If you've got a kid that's, having a problem or seeming to have kind of a toxic connection with something that's, there that shouldn't be. Another, reason to really plug in as a parent.
Wow. I think it's close enough for us to go ahead and take our break. It's going to be about 6-7 minutes, something like that long, because we do a 2-hour show. We just do the breaks all at one time and not have to break it up all through the show. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a break, and then when we come back, we'll be talking more with Morgan. So, Jeff, you want to take us out to break?
Absolutely. You're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with your hosts Henry Foister, Ceiling Cat Barbara Duncan, Tabby Cat Gash, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with tonight's wonderful guest, Morgan Knudsen. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.
Whether you're listening at home, at work, or anywhere, thanks for making Para-X part of your day. Your source for everything paranormal, Para-X.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight, those listening in the chat room and those listening from around the world. Tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Still not squished by space debris.
Still not, huh? But you're being baked. I haven't seen it that hot since last summer.
It's a little toasty this early in the year, yes.
Speaking of listeners from around the world, where do we have listeners at?
They're coming from all over the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Norway.
Right.
Oh, what?
That's quite a few then. I hope Jeff got all that down. And we got Jeffrey Gould with us.
Hello, hello.
And we got Tabby Cat Gash.
Hey there, I'm still coughing up hairballs, but I'm here.
Well, maybe you shouldn't shave so much.
Oh.
No, I think that's part of the problem. I should be.
And we
Well,
wanna,
it is.
we want to welcome back
No, we
Morgan
have to
Knudsen. Are you still with us, Morgan?
I am still with you. I'm laughing at Kat.
She needs a fuzz buster, I think.
That's a new term.
And you'll be happy to know, Henry, that I was down at in just below Antietam earlier today. I went to the Antietam Creek Winery and Vineyard, and they had live music down there. And guess what, Henry? I took a wrong turn.
Oh, well, that's...
Now, go figure.
Yeah, that's normal.
You know, I was going, I even had my GPS on my phone, and I'll be darned if I didn't turn anyway, turn the wrong way, and it says, well, turn around when possible. And I'm like, I'm on a 2-lane highway with, you know, metal barricades on both sides. Where in the heck am I supposed to turn around when possible? And I finally figured out where I needed to be. But yeah, of course, even with a GPS, Henry, I still ended up taking a wrong turn. That's me.
Yeah, that's you. I can vouch for that. All right. Well, let's get back to because we're having some pretty good conversations, and I know you've been on Paranormal 911 with haunted hospitals. Would that be haunted hospital in Canada or somewhere else?
It's global. It's actually now on in most countries on most networks. TNE, Travel Channel, Quest Red, of course, in the UK. It's been on. It's now in China. It's been in it's everywhere. Say, pick a network. Pick a network. Both of them now are all over the place. It's really cool.
Wow. So, have you been to some of these hospitals?
I've been to a couple over the years, just throughout investigations and stuff like that, and they're all have their own air about them, their own stories, and they've all got very unique histories, and even some right here in Edmonton have probably been the most memorable. So it's always fascinating to hear people's stories, and doctors and nurses are. And even first responders, you know, their accounts are so intriguing because they're one of those people, like we were talking about in the last segment, that demographic of people who don't really have a reason to bullshit about stuff, and they're some of those people. You know, they're not there to have a paranormal encounter; they're there to try to do their job. And when something happens, you got to take a step back, because I mean it's not something that's on their radar day to day.
Yeah. Now, most of the cases that you have had to, were told about them, before the show and everything, so that way you could make your comments and so forth. Was there anyone in particular, and I know that you've been on there for a number of years and, various different programs, but was there one in particular that really stood out to you that you found either absolutely incredible? In other words, it was the one that you're just sitting there with your mouth open and your eyes wide open going, wow.
Yeah, there's been a couple. I think probably the one actually from the current season of Haunted Hospitals. We're in their third season now, and it just aired, or it just started in the U.S. on Discovery Plus, and it's been on in Canada and the U.K. now for a little while. But this one case, and actually it aired just the other night, and I'd kind of let it go out of my mind, and when I saw the episode again, I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. It was a couple who ended up in the hospital. They ended up in the hospital at the same time, and they put them in the same room together. And the husband wasn't doing very well. The husband was on his way out. He was not well at all. And it finally got to the point where the husband was in his last few minutes, and the nurses asked the wife, do you want me to move the bed to your bed to his bedside and whatever? And she was like, I don't care, let him die, basically. And she turned over and she was like, I don't care. Yeah. And the nurses couldn't figure it out either. They were like, what is going on? What is this? And so when they started to dig into it a bit, they realized that both of these people had a really, really toxic relationship. Like there wasn't really any love lost. Like both of them were abusive. I don't know whether they were just, they had some sort of personality disorder or what was going on, but it was a really toxic situation. And what happened was that the nurses, when these two started to come on, when they were put on their ward, there was the negative focus that these two had generated its own consciousness. It generated its own negative entity, which is usually what happens in negative hauntings. And so they ended up sort of stuck with this negative entity on their ward while these two were there. And the husband, I mean, he finally died, and the wife got no better after he passed away. She was still really argumentative, really belligerent, and she had gotten up to go use the washroom or something like that. It was like the day of or the day after he passed away, and this thing ended up shoving her down so hard onto the floor that she ended up like basically back in the hospital. Like it was bad, and she died not too long later. And but it was, I think what got me about this case was the fact that here you've got two people that are so toxic, and they were so negatively focused and entrenched in that they literally created this thing that was hanging around with them, and even after he died, this thing was still at it. It was really crazy. And you guys will see this in the third season of Haunted Hospitals. But the nurses were under the impression that the husband had come back, but that wasn't my take at all. My take was, I think this was something that it showed up prior to the husband dying. It was extremely aggressive. And when you get aggressive entities, you're not looking at a person, you're looking at something else. So, but it was really fascinating, and so that was probably the one that stood out to me the most, at least in this season. So the actual
toxicity of their relationship actually created a thought form?
Yeah, the thought becomes a thinker in a lot of these cases, and one of the best examples of this, they actually created an experiment in Ontario in the 1970s with the Society of Psychical Research and Mensa, where they sat down, and it was called the Philip experiment. And the Philip experiment was this idea that they were going to create an entity from thought. And they wanted to see if it could be done, if that's what was going on. Sorry?
David experiment?
The Philip experiment.
But the individual they created, I thought the name was David, or am I thinking someone else?
No, they created an entity called Philip.
Philip.
So what they did was they sat down and they wrote the backstory of this character. It wasn't a real person. They just wrote a character. And they set a goal for about a year that they were going to get together every day, and they were going to use the practice of the old Victorian seances. So things like table tipping, scrying, all of that kind of thing they were going to use. And they worked on it and worked on it and worked on it for literally a year and got nowhere. And when they started to realize something that was really significant, when they looked back on the seances, they realized that the majority of these seances that people were doing back at the time, people were getting actually really happy. They were, they were having fun, they were having drinks, they were they were chilling out and just having a really good time and in the complete state of non-resistance. So when they added that factor into the experiment, into what they were doing, it was within about 48 hours and they started to get responses. So they had, furniture moving, chairs moving around. They had, specific knocks and raps and answers to questions. I mean, it was conscious. Like, this thing was absolutely conscious. They repeated the experiment with another group who created a character called Lilith, and they created the backstory. They got to the point where they were believing that this person was real, and lo and behold, Lilith showed up. They got Lilith. So it was a really interesting experiment, but it really went to show that, if you plug enough focus in, consciousness is not generated from the brain. It's fundamental. It's not emergent. So they ended up creating this entity. So I think that's what happened with this case. But it was really fascinating to see just the level of toxicity that these two had gotten themselves into.
Yeah, it seems to me that most of the shows anymore, whether it's an individual or a group, goes into a location with the mindset that whatever is in there has got to be bad, because they've already been told, well, no, this person is, they hung themselves, or they were a bad person. They go in there with that preconceived notion that this is exactly what the spirit's going to be. And they go in there, and of course, as soon as something happens, they automatically figure, well, oh my gosh, this has got to be bad. This is the spirit that's there. Or if something touches them or throws something, oh, it's got to be bad because of what they've been told. And I think a lot of times when I watch some of these shows, whether it's, the Paranormal 911, Haunted Hospitals, or any of the others, when people go into a location knowing that there's a possibility that something is in there, they have a tendency to perhaps maybe even manifest itself.
Yeah.
Do you think that's more of a possibility, where they go in there just believing it, so that's what's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, our state of expectation is so powerful, and there's been numerous experiments over the years just to show how deliberate our intention is, and how it can really create circumstances. Probably one of the best is by a fellow by the name of Dr. Dean Radin, and for a number of years he's been working with an experiment called the double slit experiment, where light, because it can be seen as both waves and particles, and it can kind of go back and forth. It's one of the only things that will do that on a particle level. Usually something is waves or it's particles. You can't have something that's both, and then light will do that. And when he got messing around with, okay, well, what is creating that shift? What is going to determine whether you get heads or tails, basically? He started to realize that the expectation of the observer is what was the determining factor, and it's known as the observer effect in physics. But the observer effect is really, really important in the world of the paranormal, because without the observer, energy is just, it is what it is. Until we observe it, it's just particles. Nothing snaps into focus until we put our attention on it. So how we put that attention on what we're doing, or what we're looking at, or what we're expecting is a massive thing. It's a big deal, and people think, oh, no, everything's just is set up and predetermined. No, it's not. And we've proved that at this point scientifically. It isn't a predetermined thing. This is something that we have a say as to what's going to show up. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think you summed it up, pretty well in your book, where you talk about vibration, and how the vibration that you give off is a manifestation. Because if you give off a certain vibration, outward, then that's what comes back. So if you go into a location that is reputed to be haunted, and the first thing you think of is, there's got to be something nasty here. There's got to be something demonic here. You're going to go in there with that vibration, and it's going to come back at you. But if you go in there, even though you you may well have been told that there's something negative or demonic, if you go in there with a mindset that, no, it's probably just some spirit that just has an attitude problem, then the whole experience is going to be very different. So you got two different people, two different vibrations, and two different experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you start out, if you go into a place in a place of, from a place of fear or upset or anything like that, like guaranteed you're gonna get back where you're sitting on that emotional level, like almost verbatim. And it's brutal for house owners and things like that, because we'll look at something like the Amityville case, because everybody knows it, where you've got family after family that had a terrible time in that house, and then you had the next family move in and nothing happened. And they're going, oh, well, it's because everything else was a hoax. Not necessarily. Sometimes it's just you've got a family with different energy that's come into a space, and they're not in the same receiving place that the family was beforehand. Sometimes you'll get that dynamic, and not often, but sometimes you'll get that dynamic between people that live in one home as well, whether it be family or roommates or whatever. You can have one person who is missing everything, like they have no experiences, they sleep through all of it, they're walking around, they don't understand what the other person's going through, and the other person's just having a terrible time, and it drives the other person nuts, because they're like, how are you not seeing this? Well, they're just on two different frequencies, and if you've got one person that's beating the drum at one end of that emotional scale, and you've got the other person that's beating the drum at the other end, they're just tuning into different things. And it's not that the other person's wrong or is a liar or not experiencing it, but we really do get where we're at. And if that other person is not in the same range, they're not going to experience it the same.
Yeah. Oh, very much so, because it really does depend on your attitude. You can have a very, a situation where somebody is quite angry, screaming, yelling, and what have you. One person is going to say that person's demonic. Another person is going to say, well, you know what? They're just having a really crotchety day. I know them. Mm-hmm. And this is just one of their days when they're just throwing off their temper. Give them a moment. They'll be right back to normal. So it really is a perception issue.
Yeah, and what's funny, too, is, you can see it just in day-to-day experience. Like if people want to take this example and sort of move it into a more physical example, you just think about going into an office, right? Like, I mean, if somebody comes in and is having a bad day, everybody kind of knows, like, you feel it off of them, like, that something's not right. They don't even have to open their mouth, and that something's off. But at that point, you kind of get to choose how you're going to deal with that and respond to it. And the people who are typically resonating within the same general emotional range will end up gravitating to that person, whether it be they either are going to sit down and bitch about the same thing, or they're going to turn around and be the brunt of that person's anger. One of the two. But I guarantee it, if you're not within the vibrational range of that person and what's going on with that person, they're going to go right by you. They're not even going to see you. And it seems so extreme, but it's really, really true. There was an experiment done a number of years ago, and the guy's name escapes me right now. But what he did was he wanted to explain this concept to the public. So what he did was he got two control groups of 5 people each, and he wanted to basically choose 5 people who believed they were the unluckiest people in the world. And then the other 5 people believed that they were the luckiest people in the world. Everything worked out for them. It was just their everything was meant to be and was going the right way. And he didn't tell them what the actual experiment was. He just told them, I need you guys to meet me at this house at this date and that time. And what he did was he took a bunch of money and he stuck the money underneath the welcome mat, like just so it was sticking out. And he left it there. And he wanted to see how much that attitude was going to play into whether or not that money got picked up. And what was so fascinating about this was that every single person who thought that everything was working out for them and they believed that and they were lucky, every single one of them saw that money. And they all picked the money up. Not one person who believed that they were unlucky and everything sucked saw that money sitting there. They all walked over it. And it begs the question, was that money even there to the people who believed that they were the most unlucky people? Did they just not see it, or was it not even there to them? But none of them picked it up.
Yeah, I think that's called, tunnel vision type of aspect,
I think
where you only see what's vision. Right in front of you.
Partly tunnel vision. It's also, I think there could be an issue of what that reality actually looks like to that person. That money just might not be there in their world. Everybody's got that different reality. So it's really hard to say, but I thought that experiment was so telling.
Yeah. It's like a horse wearing blinders. They only see what's in front of them, but they can't see from side to side.
It's pretty fascinating.
Wow. So you think perhaps that might be the case with people going into a haunted location, where it just depends on what they were told before they go in there as to what they experience.
I think it's not only what they're told, but I think it also is depending on I think a large part of it is their emotional state. One thing I've found about negative entities specifically is that they don't really like chaos, and which seems very in opposition to what they are, because they come off as very chaotic. They can rip holes in walls and destroy houses and all sorts of stuff. But they don't really like chaos. They are very particular when it comes to the order that they want things in, and including the people in the house. They're very hierarchical, and they tend to have the family sorted into a hierarchy. Who goes first? If they go first, if there's no real leader in the household, they will take that position. And if you step out of line in their world, that's usually when you get either bitten or scratched or something will happen. But they don't like disorder. So when you get a house like this, and then you put somebody in who is either fearful, or they're angry, or they're upset, or any of those sort of negative end of that emotional stick, that's seen as disorder and chaos. So if you get somebody who's there and then you shove them into this environment, not only is this a new person that doesn't belong there, but that entity is not going to be, it's going to step up and correct that person. It just will. So the odds of them getting bitten or hurt or pushed or something is pretty high, almost 100%. So coming in with the right energy, with the right emotions, leaving your baggage and your crap at home, is really going to be vitally important to how you're going to be perceived. And I know with every case that I go into, I'm really careful about the energy that I come in with, so that I'm either off its radar entirely, so I can deal with the people, or it's going to see me in a way that's not disruptive. So it's really a matter of building, understanding how you're being seen by what's in there, and knowing how to move through these events and deal with it as they come.
Oh, okay. Well, excuse me. I keep having hairballs this evening. I have no idea why. Now, when it comes to Galen, and I absolutely love this subject. You have I don't really want to refer to him as a pet, because sometimes they're more than that, but you have a snake named Galen.
Yes.
And I'm very, very curious as to why you got him and how he fits into all of your teachings, because I've seen him, in pictures and everything, and you'll excuse me for this, but sometimes when I look at him and see that face, and I can see him smiling, he reminds me an awful lot of the cartoon character on the Disney Robin Hood.
Yes. Yep.
It's just, and the first thing that I thought of, now he doesn't have the, the teeth with the, space in between them like Terry Thomas, the actor, did, but, he does have that cute little smile.
He does.
And everything. Yep. And I can see that there is a great deal of a connection between the two of you. So, just like a lot of us, I have cats, and Barbara's got cats, and Henry's got cats, and a lot of us do, and Jeff's got cats. So we all have felines, and I guess me personally, I don't really quite understand the connection that you have with Galen, but there's got to be some reason why you connected with this particular critter.
Yeah, well, he's so magical because reptiles are incredibly smart. Like, they are smart on a level that is just, once you have them, you can't really go back. I've had reptiles all my life. I've had iguanas and geckos and whatever, and all of them have been incredibly intelligent. Galen he's really amazing. He's a problem solver. He'll use tools. His EQ, his emotional intelligence is extremely high. And he's got such a bright, bold personality. Like, he's turning 17 in June. And I've had him since he was 6 months. And he is just a ball of joy to be around. He's got a sense of humor. He'll play tricks on you. He's got certain interests. He's got favorite television shows and hobbies and all sorts of things. And I think he's blown apart the stigma that a lot of people have had around snakes, because there's been so many people that have said, "Oh, I got a phobia." I'm like, "Yeah, I'll spend an hour with Galen and a phobia is going to disappear." And it does. He really has changed the face of a lot of people's fears. So I think when I first had the idea of having a little snake was after my gecko eventually passed away, and she was such a sweet little thing. And I'd never had a snake before. He was my first, and I fell in love with him at the pet store. I had not gone in to buy one. He was passed to me by one of the owners, and the little guy, he looked at me and he yawned and he curled up in my arms and fell asleep. And I knew it was instant knowledge. I said, I got to take him home. I guess this is it. He picked me. That's it. I don't have a choice. So I went home and I got everything set up, and then I went back and got him and brought him home, and he was so excited. He couldn't even stop moving. He was excited. And it was kind of a journey ever since, but he's brilliant. Unbelievably smart, and I think he blows a lot of people's minds when they realize, like, oh my God, this little guy's got an awareness beyond what most people understand.
So what kind of...
When I back east, I spent 4 years as an animal control officer through our local shelter, and we serviced 3 different communities in northern New Jersey, and we once got a call from some, pardon the expression, Karen, who, before there was even that term, but she called saying there was a snake in the next door's backyard, and there was a child, and da-da-da. I'm like, oh, all right, it's probably just some garter snake, and the woman's insane or something, insanely fearful, that is. And so I go over, and sure enough, it's a married couple with their toddler and their big, massive boa constrictor. And I said, oh, well, someone was complaining that there was a dangerous snake in here, and obviously there isn't. So they let me play with their snake for a few minutes, and it was great. And I'm sure if the nosy neighbor was, watching, I'm sure she was not happy that they let me pick it up, put it around my shoulders, and such like that.
Yeah, they're wonderful, and, it's so disgustingly misunderstood. And that's, as I say, one of the things that I'm amazed with Galen, because when every once in a while when I'm doing spiritual health care, I'll bring him on as my guest host, and the little guy, he's so funny because he knows what the camera is and whatever, and he'll be looking in the camera and hanging out, and it's and it's great, and people see that, and it it just changes their perception about what's going on. My partner, he's funny because when we met, he had never really had much to do with snakes at all. So he was coming from a good position because he didn't really have a stigma or an opinion about them. But just the other day, he said to me, the great thing about this is, he says, they teach tolerance. And he said, the great thing about, any of this stuff, specifically with Galen and with snakes, is the fact that they're teaching people to release the stigma of the unknown and their fears and things like that. And they teach tolerance. And I thought that was really true.
Morgan, there was earlier in the evening, there was a question that was posed to me, and she wanted to know, her name is Mufi, she wanted to know, is there such a thing as a love tulpa or a positive tulpa? And I think you kind of answered that in a sense that Galen is probably a very positive tulpa.
Yeah, I think so. I think he is, and I think some of the connections that we make in this world are not predetermined, I would say, but maybe pre-decided in non-physical. I really think that I think we have a lot of discussions before we manifest here, and I've had so many experiences over the years where stuff and people, you meet somebody and you recognize them, and you don't know where you recognize them from, and it turns out that person has a massive role in your life. My partner and I, we were like that too, and and I think Galen was one of them, and I think he's been here before. I think I noticed traits between him and my iguana, for instance, that seem a little beyond coincidence. So I do. I think there is that, but I think we also have to be receptive to it, and ready for it, and ready for those connections. And when we are, the teacher shows himself, and I think, and Galen's a brilliant teacher. Like he's one of those individuals, if I'm having a bad day or something like that, he'll let me know. He will let me know. I'll get, pushed or huffed at or something, but if my attention is in a negative space, like, he picks up on it immediately. So, there's masters, I think, that come to us in our experience, and when we're ready for it, we get the benefit of that.
Yeah, me personally, I really well and truly believe that it doesn't necessarily have to be a human being that you can make a connection with. You can definitely make a connection with any being, because of the fact that they've got a soul. They have, a spirit about them, and you can connect to them. I've definitely had, certain animals in my life, mostly cats, and a few of them that I've had such a close connection with that even after they've passed on, I can still feel them. I can still Absolutely. Feel them rubbing up against my leg, or I can feel them, licking my hand or something. It's that spiritual connection that I think it just has to do with our energy. And, and it isn't just memory. It isn't just something that we wish for. I think we well and truly have that connection, because we are a vibrational energy as living beings, and we can connect with other living beings on a vibrational sense. And so when our pets are gone, I hate to use that term, but when our animals are gone, we can still feel them. We can still, just feel their love. And it really makes you feel good to know that they're not necessarily gone. They might be gone to where we can't feel their fur or anything like that, but we can still feel them inside.
Well, that's oftentimes what we grieve is we are hardwired as people to, and as physical presences here on the world, to really be reliant on physicalness. And that's part of what we grieve, because that physicalness, that physical presence isn't there. And because we are so hardwired to be reliant on physical objects and whatever, and we're used to perceiving physical objects over and over, sometimes that is the grief. We're not. It's a massive shift in understanding and changing that relationship. That relationship is now not going to be the same. It just won't. But it can be something else. And I think that's where people end up getting stuck so often, is that, you put it so well, where it's like, that experience can still be had. But, people get stuck on, well, yeah, but now that other one isn't there. Well, yeah, but it doesn't mean that it's ended. It's now transformed into something else. And it's a powerful awareness when we have it. And let me tell you, like, from what I've understood after, 2 decades of this, is that they are so excited that when we finally clue in and we can actually tune in and, be receptive to that, how excited they are when we finally get it.
There's a question that was in the chat room, and it was from Kat. She wanted to know how a living being is a tulpa.
That's interesting. I think, when as we're kind of moving through the world, I think whether or not we are in touch with the inner part of who we are, the true being of who we really are. We are that spiritual power. We really are that person first. We are that entity first. We are that non-physical part of us first. So I think separating the idea of, a living being versus non-living, or physical versus non-physical, I think there's a bit of a flaw in that premise, because we really, really are a manifestation of non-physical. Sometimes we hear the expression of, we're a physical or non-physical being having a physical experience. And I think that's really, really true. So I don't think it's necessarily that, we are separate from that. I think we can be, we are both at the end of the day. We're both. So having that, partner or best friend or something like that, it can come in so many different forms. But at the end of the day, we are non-physical. So I guess that would be my answer to that.
Yeah, for me, my own belief, I put it in two different ways. I put it in a spiritual sense, and I also put it in a scientific sense, that energy does not cease to exist once its basic form changes. It just changes into something else, or morphs into something else, or it goes into another form. And I think that's what human beings do. Once our physical shell is gone, our spiritual sense just takes on a different form. And that is what most people perceive as ghosts or spirits.
Yeah,
And I don't think that we necessarily die. And even though our brains are made up of physical matter, the electrical energy that makes up our brains, it doesn't die. It's got to go somewhere. And I think more often than not, once we pass on, that electrical energy has to manifest itself in some way. And it's unfortunate that sometimes some spirits are just unable to comprehend the fact that now they don't have a physical body anymore, and they're stuck. And that's where they become the residuals. And then others, they are aware of the fact that they've passed on, and they use that electrical energy, and that's why they are conscious, the intelligent spirits and so forth. And for the living, in order to connect with them, you have to have an open mind, you have to have the belief, And you also have to have that vibration, that resonance, with the spirit world to be able to connect to them. There's a lot of skeptics that do encounter, spirits and so forth. That's got to be for another reason. But I think for the most part, that's why we're able to do that. Energy doesn't die. Vibration just continues. And so it just continues on. And that's how we relate to people and our pets. And when it comes time that Galen passes on, you're still going to feel him. You're still going to know he's there. There's
absolutely.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, that connection, it never ever goes away. And, as long as we're open to that, and we're, staying in tune and whatever, then everybody is hardwired for that. And it really is about, making peace with where you are enough. And of course, sometimes that can be really hard, especially if you're dealing with, a rough relationship of some sort where there has to be forgiveness and you've got to, work through stuff. But I think, we are hardwired for that. And the more we kind of clean up, our stigmas about it and, our own issues with it. And, we'll get that connection back. I think part of the problem with people at times is that they get really, really hung up on who the person was when they were alive. And because sometimes, of course, you wish you had this with them or that with them and whatever. And we forget that it's like when they move into non-physical energy, all that ego and stuff, that's not there anymore. That doesn't exist. And oftentimes people are really surprised. Like when you talk with the Windbridge Institute, they're probably one of the best institutes in the world in terms of they have the only scientifically tested mediums in the world. And you talk with them, and it's so funny because people are shocked when they get in touch with some of these people, because it's not who they remember. It's not the grouchy jerk of an uncle or the grumpy grandfather or the whatever. It's like they don't have that issue anymore. So they're kind of shocked that it's like, well, hold on, like this person's actually, I can get along with this person. What's going on? And, they don't know what to do with that. But, we've got it really the problem with so many of these non-physical relationships that we want to have is that, we're the ones that end up getting stuck in whatever, they move on, they get, they get clarity. They know what's going on, but people get stuck in their story. It comes right back around to where we were at the beginning. And we have to be able to clean that up in order to get what it is we want out of these relationships.
So, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Nope.
What about someone who has lived and died, now they're a spirit? How do they get chosen, or how do they become reincarnated to be someone else but still have the same identity?
That's one thing that's never really been discovered. There's been plenty of people, doctorates and whatnot, that have attempted to get a better understanding of reincarnation and how it works, and we really don't know. When it comes down to the nitty-gritty of it, there's a lot of mysteries around reincarnation that we really don't understand. Some of it, and we don't know exactly how this ties in, but some of it might come to things like memory cells and whatnot. And what I mean by that is when they began to look at people, say, for example, who had received organs from an individual who had passed away, say they had a lung transplant, heart transplant, something major. What they were discovering was that people were taking on characteristics of the donor. So they were seeing things like, massive personality changes, or suddenly that person would have like a major talent that they never had before, or the organ donor had. And they would have no knowledge of this because, of course, you never know your organ donor. Or usually you don't know your organ donor. And what they've discovered, and how this also plays out in things like residual energy, is that whenever we're in contact with something, we end up basically leaving memory cells behind. And this was just a very recent discovery, and it comes back again to some of the quantum stuff that I was talking about at the beginning. What they've discovered is that as we're leaving these traces of ourselves behind, this is something that not only are say mediums who are good at psychometry are picking up on. They're able to pick up an object and give you names, dates, and so on and so forth. But they're beginning to realize that it has something also to do with things like organ transplants and whatnot, where people are taking on these characteristics. Hence residual energy. When you go into a place and you see stuff recurring over and over and over again, or a person is like walking into an environment and the medium is able to pick up on people who lived in the house. Well, yeah, of course they are, because they're able to pick up on what's going on with this phenomenon on a particle level. So they're starting to understand what's going on. And I kind of wonder if there's something in that range that's going on with reincarnation as well. But I mean, they're still at the smaller stages, I think, with that, because really it's some of those questions are really tricky to answer. But I'm excited about the breakthrough when they've with what they've discovered around stuff like that. Another possible option, at least from a physical perspective, is they've discovered that when say, for example, you have a medium that sits down and is really accurate about giving the person across from them a reading, what they've discovered is that there's actually a level of telepathy that's going on in between those two individuals. So it's less likely that person is actually tuning into a dead loved one, and more likely that they're tuning into the person in front of them. And there's been a number of studies, not only, I think it was Dr. William Roll that started it, but there's been a number of studies into this, and they're beginning to realize that this is probably what's going on. So I think in the next little while we're going to see some major breakthroughs come out in regards to exactly how some of this is working. But they're definitely they're on a roll. So we'll see what goes.
Let's see here. Oh, somebody asked a question. How did snakes lose their legs?
That's actually a good question. That's an evolutionary question. Snakes actually lost their legs through the evolutionary process. A lot of people thought, well, lizards are more highly advanced. They gained legs, and snakes gained legs, and it's actually the other way around. Snakes ended up losing their legs because they were in the way. So that's actually how that went down. But some snakes have almost like these little vestigial legs in a way called spurs. Which they have, and whatnot. But yeah, it was, we're behind the times. We should, if we lost our arms and legs, we'd be a little bit more further up the chain, I guess. I don't know.
And sharks are learning to walk on water, so we're in trouble now.
We are in trouble. This is a problem.
Oh, goodness.
Well, our time is quickly running by. Barbara, you got another question?
Well, there were still some questions regarding positive tulpas, and you talked earlier about being carrying our bad entities around and the bad sort of connections around. What about carrying joy?
Oh, it's the best, and when we're able to get there and we're able to, really start taking the lid off our dreams, our passions, and what we want to do in life, and being more disciplined about, if you're in a miserable job, get out. If you're in a miserable relationship, do what you have to do and get out. Get yourself to the place of that pure positive energy, because so many people, I think they get locked up in the negative stuff, and then they're wishing for all this other positive stuff to happen. But the thing is like you've really got to set yourself up for success. And when you do, and you've got an environment that is going to nurture that joy, and you've made the decision that you're willing to get reconnected with who you are, the stuff that happens will knock your socks off. Like the paranormal stuff that will go on that will blow your mind it's like you begin to realize so fast that there is no such thing as coincidence. You are bringing this in to your universe. And when you realize that, and you realize that the power of your joy is bringing you what you want, and is bringing you the connection with non-physical, with all the stuff that's just so cool, you have a really hard time going back to anything that sucks. You're just not willing to put up with it anymore, because you know what you're sacrificing. You know that going back is going to mean that you have to let go of all that awesome that you just realized that you had access to. And it's non-physical. It's it's information. It's knowledge. It's intuitiveness. It's awareness. It's the people that are going to help you from non-physical. It's so much. There's guidance. There's all of this amazing stuff, and just stuff starts lining up. Stuff in your life that wasn't working out starts lining up for you. It's crazy, and the solutions, when you're in that negative space, you're not in the range of the solution. It's not going to happen. You've got to be able to change the way you feel, and then you see the results. It's not the other way around. People are always saying, well, if this just happened, well, then I could get happy. Well, you're in trouble, because it's not going to work that way. You have to start from the other way around. And when you shift that, you'll shift into the new thing. And yeah, the experiences, the help you will get from non-physical will blow your mind. There is nothing that it will not do to help you.
Wow. All right, we're down to less than 4 minutes, looks like. I think what I'd like for you to do, unless somebody else has another quick question. Nobody? Okay. Give out all your information of how people can follow you, contact you, and your sites and stuff. And then just stay on until after we're off, and we'll talk with you for a minute.
Sounds good. So you guys can find me at entityseeker.ca. And it's my official site. You guys can catch up on tons of interviews, all my spiritual healthcare classes. You can find those and my live shows. There's a bunch of live shows that are on there as well as some of my fire lessons and whatever on entityseeker.ca. YouTube.com/entityseeker is my YouTube channel. And I'm also on Twitter under Morgan Knudsen. And Facebook is the seat of the of the live spiritual healthcares every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. You guys can join us for discussion, and we talk about this stuff. We talk about tools. We go over caseloads, all sorts of really awesome stuff. The community is incredible. So I highly encourage people to come Wednesday mornings, 10 a.m. Mountain Time, to the Entityseeker Facebook page, and you'll find it. It's lots of fun. All
right. Tabby, why don't you let everybody know who our guest is next week?
Yes, sir. Next week, our special guest will be renowned author Lynn McKenzie. She is a medium, an intuitive, and an animal communicator, both with the living and those pets and animals that have passed on. It should be a great show, so tune in.
All right. I guess there was something else I had too and forgot what it was. I know Tabby, this is your, third week with us?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And just delightful to have you. Of course, I've worked with you for years and years and years. Way too long.
Makes it sound like we're old, Henry.
I am. So, with that anyway.
I just want to say, obviously, next time we have Morgan on, we'll have to discuss Paranormal 911.
Definitely.
Yes, yep. We will. I'm sure we can find a whole bunch of stuff on that. So, anyway, with that, our time is just about out. So I think what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and be jumping off here in a second. So I get everything lined up here. Maybe. If I can find my little mousey. I think it lost its legs.
Tell your cats to leave the mouse alone, Henry.
I was just going to say something along those lines.
All right. With that, this is Henry Foister.
Jeffrey Gould.
Barbara Duncan.
Tabby Cat Gash.
And we will see you next week at the same time. So, good night, everybody.
Night, stay safe.
You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal View.